Hey everybody, this should be a short lesson. You will need 5 note cards. This is day 2 of classical conditioning, and let's get started. Okay, so when Pavlov studied classical conditioning and he trained the dog to drool to the sound of a bell, he came up with 5 terms. Okay, and these terms will later be applied in the field of psychology. Okay, acquisition, extinction, spontaneous recovery, generalization, discrimination. That's it. So you make a separate note card for each of these 5. The most important one is generalization. Okay? All right, so let's do it. Acquisition. So let's look at the root of the word acquisition, acquire, the getting of. Okay? So acquisition is when the human or the animal is learning. It's the pairing. Okay? So if I knock on my desk and then I poke you in the back of your neck, I knock on the desk, poke you in the back of your neck with a sharpened pencil, knock on the desk, poke you in the back of your neck, and then finally I knock on my desk and then you flinch because you are learning, you are acquiring that connection, the pairing. So it's basically the first few times that Pavlov rang the bell. Okay. All right, so does timing matter? Okay, well, let me ask you this. If I ring a bell, ding, and then 30 seconds later I give the dog a piece of food, you think a dog is going to make that connection? Probably not. Okay? Same thing with let's say the dog pees on the floor, and then a minute later I spank him. That's not going to work. The dog's not going to make the connection. So the timing does matter. They should be very close together in timing. Okay? So if I'm going to ding, and then I'm immediately give the dog some food, like a half second later, okay? Not at the same time. It needs to be very close. Okay? So the bell, the CS, the conditioned stimulus, the bell should come before the unconditioned stimulus, the food. The bell should come before the food. Okay, that'll make a little bit more sense later. Okay, all right, so write down the red, acquisition, pairing food with the bell. Okay, so think of acquire, acquisition. All right, moving right along. Okay. Extinction. The dog stops drooling to the bell. And if you want to write this down, the effect wears off. Okay, so let's say I go to a restaurant, I get sick, I throw up in the bathroom. And as a result, I don't want to eat there anymore. Well, after a few years, maybe I'll get over it and I'll start eating there again. We call that extinction. Okay, so if you train a dog to drool to a bell, and you keep ringing that bell, eventually the dog will stop drooling to the bell. Unless you time it right and you keep it going, okay? But eventually the dog will stop. And if it's a phobia, let's say you're attacked by a dog and now you are scared of dogs. Well, eventually maybe you'll stop being scared of dogs. The effect will die like a dinosaur. It'll go extinction. Is extinction permanent? Could it ever come back? The answer is yes. It could come back. Think of this as like a relapse. So let's say you're afraid of snakes, and then you stop being afraid of snakes, and then one day, boom, you're afraid of snakes again. It's kind of like a relapse. Think of it as like a relapse, okay? Or you ring a bell a few times, the dog does not drool, but then you ring it again, ding, and then the dog drools to the bell. That's called spontaneous recovery. Okay? So it comes back. So in a way, the word defines itself. Recovery, it comes back. Spontaneous, at some random moment, it comes back. Like a relapse. Generalization. So I hope by now, and I expect you to have learned about the little Albert experiment. The little baby Albert was trained to be afraid of the white rat. But then what happened? Little Albert became afraid of all furry things, all things that are similar. Little baby Albert became afraid of Santa Claus's beard and all furry things, not just the rat. Think of an example of like a combat veteran flinching to firecrackers because they sound like guns. Okay? Think about your girlfriend smells a certain way, and then you learn to like similar smells. Okay, think of it that way. Okay, so, all right, no, never mind. All right, so that's generalization. So how about this? You get bit by a chihuahua, and then at first you're afraid of chihuahuas, but then you become afraid of all dogs. That's a good example of generalization. Okay? So again, the little Albert experiment, it's also called stimulus generalization. Okay? And moving right along, and this is a joke. Okay, moving right along. Discrimination. Discrimination is knowing the difference. So if you train a dog to drool to a bell, and then the dog drools to the bell, but not to a gong, then the dog knows the difference. It's kind of like you're afraid of chihuahuas, but you're not afraid of German shepherds because you can discriminate. Okay? So in a way, discrimination is kind of the opposite of generalization, if you think about it. Generalization is when you learn to react to similar things. Discrimination is the opposite. It's when you know the difference. You may have heard the phrase, I have discriminating taste. Okay? Means that you know the difference. Imagine if you have discriminating taste in wine. You know the difference between a French wine and a California wine by tasting it. You are discriminating. Let me ask you this. Can you tell the difference between Mexican Coke and American Coke? If so, then you can discriminate. You know the difference. Now, keep in mind of the use of the word discriminate in turn. Now, in the social psychology chapter, we talk about discrimination as like racial discrimination when you think differently about different races of people. That's discrimination. When you have actions, when you act based upon your thoughts, that's discrimination in social psychology. But in this chapter, discrimination is simply knowing the difference. So, how can we use classical conditioning? Okay, what can we do with this? What use can we do with classical conditioning? Well, it turns out we can use it in therapy. There is a drug called antabuse by prescription, and for some highly motivated alcoholics who want to stop drinking, if they take this pill and then they drink alcohol after they've drunk this pill, the alcohol mixes with the antabuse. It gives them nausea and vomiting. And then as a result, people begin through classical conditioning to associate the taste and smell of alcohol with nausea and vomiting. Now, of course, some alcoholics will stop taking antabuse so they can start drinking again. But again, not every treatment for alcoholism is effective. Okay, some people go to 12-step programs. Some people might try this. You know, that's just something that you'll have to talk to your doctor about. Hopefully you won't be the alcoholic, though. Okay. Here's another application. By the way, we call this taste aversion. So here's another example. Let's say you're a rancher and you've got sheep out in the fields and coyotes keep eating your sheep or wolves. Well, one thing you can do is you could take a dead sheep, and you can put this poison on it, this dead sheep carcass, and you can leave it out there for the coyotes and the wolves to find. They'll eat it. Now, they won't die, okay, but they'll get sick. And then the coyotes and the wolves will stop. They'll have a taste aversion to killing your sheep. So it's a humane way of getting coyotes and wolves to stop killing your sheep out in the middle of nowhere. Okay. Okay, again, this is just a random cartoon on classical conditioning. Think about how you are when you automatically jump when you hear a cell phone ding. Or if you're in school, you hear the bell ring and you want to get up and jump up. Okay. I have never seen this on the AP exam, but I've mentioned this a few times already. The Garcia Effect is when you go to a restaurant and you get sick and you don't want to eat there. It was by a guy named John Garcia. And what he was doing is he was studying cancer patients who would get nauseous from the chemotherapy, and that nausea made them not want to get the chemotherapy and save their life. So again, I've never seen this on the AP exam, but it's there you go. It's interesting though. Okay. Now, I have never seen her on the AP exam, but she is on the list. But her name is Mary Cover Jones. And so in a way, she did the opposite of the Little Albert experiment. She was actually there when John Watson did the Little Albert experiment. But what she did was something with the little Peter. And what she did was through counter conditioning, this little boy was afraid of rabbits. And so she would desensitize this boy of this little boy's fear of rabbits by pairing the rabbit with something pleasant, like a Snickers bar or something like that. So she is really the godmother of desensitization. Okay? So she's on the list of people that I should teach you. So there you go. That's about all I know about Mary Cover Jones. So a short definition would be desensitization, just one word. Okay? All right. So let's try some multiple choice. Classical conditioning could account for how a child learns to what? Okay, so if you're having trouble with this, think about little Albert, the little baby Albert. All right, and the answer is right. If little Albert can learn to fear the white rabbit, then you can learn to fear the dark. When advertisers pair their products with attractive people or enjoyable surroundings in the hope that pairings will cause their products to evoke good feelings, they are using the principles derived from what? The answer is classical conditioning. Now, I'm going to teach you these two later, but right now, classical conditioning. Classical conditioning could account for how a child learns to what? And the answer is D. Okay. The initial stage of learning a response is called what? Okay, so the first few times you ring a bell and give the dog food, what's that called? The answer is acquisition, acquire, acquisition. When Lewis was a child, he really liked the smell of the rose-scented perfume his mother always used to wear. He came to associate that scent with snuggles and hugs from his mom. As an adult, Lewis likes any floral scent, including the smell of lilacs and wildflowers. This example illustrates the classical conditioning process of what? All right, so Lewis at first liked just rose. Now he likes all flowers. So what's that called? The answer is A. All right, here's an AP question. In classical conditioning, stimulus generalization occurs when an organism responds to what? Okay, hit pause. The answer is, okay, so that's an interesting question, okay? So the unconditioned stimulus would be like what you're naturally reacting to without any conditioning. So if you start liking roses, but then you like things that are similar to roses. Okay, tough one, tough one. Michaela wants to condition her dog to drool at the sound of the telephone. So she plans to pair the sound of the ringing telephone with a tasty dog treat. To use classical conditioning most effectively, Michaela should present the tasty dog treat. Okay, hit pause. And the answer is C. They need to be close, but not at the same time. D, that would be too long. That would be too long. Okay. Ken used to drool at the smell of peanut butter cookies as they baked, and he couldn't wait to sink his teeth into that first cookie. However, Ken's new roommate, Meg, makes terrible peanut butter cookies, and the smell of them baking is no longer associated with a wonderful taste experience. Consequently, Ken finds that the smell of the cookies no longer makes him drool in anticipation. No longer makes him drool in anticipation. The answer is extinction. It died like a dinosaur. It's gone. Mariah developed a fear of the water when she fell off a river last summer. This year, she took swimming lessons and thought she had finally overcome her fear of water. She was eagerly looking forward to an upcoming rafting trip. However, as soon as she stepped onto the raft, she was instantly terrified again. She was instantly terrified again. Okay, so it was like a relapse. The answer is, all right, it just came back spontaneously. If a dog salivates to a blue light and not to a yellow light, the dog is showing evidence of what? So the dog knows the difference. And the answer is discrimination. By the way, dogs can't see red, but they can see blue and yellow. Okay. When Diana was 3 years old, she became terrified when the neighbor's budgie bird kept flying near her head. Today, she is afraid of all birds, including robins, pigeons, and blue jays. Diana's fear illustrates the classical conditioning process of what? So she was afraid of just one bird. Now she's afraid of all birds. So the answer is generalization. Blank means treating two stimuli alike. Blank means treating two stimuli differently. Okay, hit pause. The answer is, okay, so generalization's like treating all, being afraid of all birds instead of just the budgie bird. Discrimination is knowing the difference. If you picked D, you just had it backwards. All right, that's enough for today. Thank you. All right.